Sometimes when you're driving down the road all by yourself, you begin to hear a voice that tells you need to look around, pay attention, maybe something isn't quite right. That voice is me. It's the voice of Gord. Hey everybody, quick intro today. Welcome back to Voice of Gord. I just released a show yesterday, interview with my good buddy Grant Martsoff at the Savage Collective. Trying to knock out a few of them here, and I've finally got around to releasing this great interview I did with a wonderful guy named, you might know him from Rumble. His name is R.B. Ham online. His real name is Richard Winteringham. One of these fellas that stood up for your rights during the COVID regime. Richard's from out in Saskatchewan, and he's been one of these people who has been severely persecuted by both the provincial and federal government and the sort of whole COVID regime writ large. And you don't know about him because, you know, there's been so many people punished by the Canadian government, by the provincial governments, that the media just never talks about it. And when they do, they always focus on their main targets. You know, people like Tamara Lich and Chris Barber, maybe the Coots guys. But that's a way to get you distracted from the fact that they've gone after so many regular, normal people with regular jobs and families who are trying to do right by their families and their communities and stood up and said something during COVID. And Richard's one of those guys. And he joins the show to tell us his story. And we also get into current Canadian politics, this prorogation by Parliament of the venal, vindictive, and soon-to-be replaced Justin Trudeau. We discuss a little bit about the chosen replacement for him, Mr. Mark Carnage, former governor of the Bank of Canada and the Bank of England. We get into lots in this discussion. I'm very happy to bring it to you. Sorry I'm dropping it on a Friday, but that gives you all weekend to listen. And if you're one of my truck driving friends, you can get this preloaded and ready to go for being on the road next week. Richard's a wonderful guy. We had a very lengthy and detailed discussion. I really enjoyed this one. Go into the show notes. Check out his fundraiser. You know, Richard's been fined like $45,000 by the government. They're talking about garnishing his wages. His credit's been all screwed up. All because Richard stood up and said no more to the COVID regime. And in Canada, you no longer have any rights whatsoever. And when you hear Richard's story, you'll understand what I'm talking about. If you haven't already, subscribe to my Substack. Subscribe on whatever your podcast catchers are for Voice of Gord. Lots of stuff coming out as always. And I appreciate you guys being here and listening. Head over to Rumble, to Richard's channel. It's called RB Ham. He puts out a great show over there. I'll have a link to that as well. And all right, let's get going. Mr. Richard Winteringham. All right, g'day everybody, and welcome back to another episode of Voice of Gord. I'm Gord, and this is my very sick voice. I haven't recorded a show in probably 6 or 7 weeks. Part of that's due to having the flu and Christmas, and now I have a lung infection, and I'm going to try and knock this one out. The other voice you're going to hear today is of someone I met last year. We were just talking offline. I didn't intend for this podcast to become a documentary series about the persecuted of Canada, but here we are. And I bumped this gentleman you're about to hear has his own show on Rumble. You may have heard me on it. It's called Beyond the Pale with R.B. Ham. R.B. Ham being my guest here today, Richard Winteringham. Good morning, Richard.
Good morning, Gord, and I see you have a friend along with you.
Yeah, this is my daughter Georgia,
Hi, Georgia.
who's homesick from school today and doesn't want to let me podcast alone. So here she is.
It's all right.
Yeah. So where am I finding you today? Saskatoon?
Yeah, I'm at home in Saskatoon. I've got a I've got at 1 o'clock this afternoon. I got to do a rehabilitation test. I'm a truck driver, as you know, and last April I blew up my knee slipping on the ice, and so I was on workers' comp for a while. Still kind of and I'm on a return to work program. So I've been back out on the road for a few weeks, and I got a rehab assessment coming up this afternoon. So I'm home on a Monday, which is rare for me. And yeah, so that's what's going on. I'm here in Saskatoon, Saskatchewan, where I was born and raised, and where all the drama has occurred with the fighting of the COVID tyranny when it happened. But there's a long preamble to that. I don't know how far you want to get into that.
Well, we're recording this on January 27th, which is basically the 3-year anniversary of the beginnings of the Freedom Convoy.
Yeah,
So
it's
I
true.
think this is very timely.
Hmm.
And, as many people know, the convoy wasn't simply all the truckers going to Ottawa. It was a nationwide protest that had spontaneously organized. Um, what's the word I'm looking for? I'm having a brain fart.
Spontaneous organized protests all across the nation.
Yeah, in solidarity, right? So
Yeah,
like,
yeah.
we had famously one in Coots. I think there was one in BC. There was another at Emerson, Manitoba, and then there was ones that weren't even at border crossings. There was a number at Queens Park in Toronto, and I understand you were participating in a few in Saskatchewan yourself.
Yeah, well, here's the long and the short of it. So, yeah, at the time that the COVID thing came in, I was not working as a truck driver anymore. I had been off the road for a few years, and I was working as a caretaker at an elementary school. And so, the thing about the COVID thing, I was aware of it being a scam right from the start because I'm one of those rare people they call a conspiracy theorist, which means, I'm 3 years ahead of the curve in a lot of things.
You're
And
paying atten- you're paying attention and learning things on your own, not just
yes.
suckling at the teat of government narratives.
Right. Well, a conspiracy theorist is nothing more than a person who can put patterns together and form a hypothesis about those patterns. And I've been a long time researcher. I mean, way since the 1990s when I first got involved with it, when I started realizing that everything that we were being told was not quite, what's going on. And so I read a lot of books, and of course, like George Orwell's 1984, Philip K. Dick's works, Ray Bradbury's works, you name it. Like there was always these warnings in about a dystopian future that you could find yourself in, and you could slip into some sort of authoritarian, totalitarian system if you aren't aware. And the most important part of living in a democracy or a representative democracy is being aware of what's happening, right? And using your voice to speak out when it matters. I mean, that's why we haven't, haven't had a real serious problem in this country, at least since the end of World War II. But the thing is, I've been aware of the pushing of these health measures for a long time, all the way back to the SARS outbreak in 1991. And of course, the famous Time magazines warning us of all these pandemics that are coming, bird flu, this, Ebola, that, Zika virus in Brazil. They were kind of preparing the way for it. And so in October of 2019, there was a thing called Event 201, which was a live tabletop exercise of what would happen if a novel coronavirus got out of China and spread across the world. And it was done in New York City. And the participants were the World Health Organization, the World Economic Forum, the UN, Johns Hopkins University for Health Research, which is a very prestigious place where they train all these bureaucrats at. And the CIA was involved and members of the media. And they ran this tabletop exercise of what they would do. And one of the most important things they talked about was controlling the message. And the other thing they talked about was censoring dissident voices that might affect how we fight this supposed novel coronavirus that gets out of China. And then a few months later, lo and behold, they flip it into a real-time exercise. So right from the moment, I knew this was a scam because this was ticking all those boxes of an event that they can use for their purposes, which the World Health Organization and the World Economic Forum we're always talking about, right? And what really concerned me, of course, is in June of 2020, just a couple of months after everybody started freaking out about this so-called COVID-19 virus, was that Klaus Schwab and Thierry Mallory released their book COVID-19 and the Great Reset, and I read it, and I went, my God, they know this is they know what this is. It's a very minor. It's a flu-like virus. It's not much more deadly than the flu, and they even mention it in the book that yeah, it's not going to be a big deal. But we're going to be able to use this as an opportunity to start
Social
reimagine.
engineering and
Yeah.
yeah, reorganizing society to their
Yes.
particular vision of how it should be. Yeah,
Which.
no, it's hilarious to me. I appreciate all the research and the history of what you've done. It's just hilarious to me that like you read about Event 201 and you read the Great Reset, and if you talked about that stuff, like you say, you'd get dismissed as a conspiracy theorist. But these are actual things that actually happened, actual books with
Hmm.
the actual words and the actual plans of actual
Yep.
people who actually
Yep.
exist in the world.
Yes.
But if you talk about these actual things, they just dismiss you out of hand. It's very, very worrying trend, and we see this even to this day. Like they're still going off about misinformation and disinformation, and the loathsome, soon-to-be gone prime minister of our country, Justin Trudeau.
Well, we hope.
We hope, yeah. He's been doing a farewell tour in American media. Strangely enough, he showed up with I think MSNBC, and then he was on Jen Psaki's show. Maybe I think he was with Jake Tapper at CNN. So like
Yeah.
Trudeau a couple weeks ago goes on this American media tour, and when he's asked about why he's leaving and why he's had such a hard time, he blames it on misinformation and disinformation and all these right wingers. Like there's no room in that guy's mind, nor in the rest of our sort of elite ruling class, that maybe they made some mistakes. Maybe they did the wrong things. That
Hmm.
maybe the demos, the people that are supposed to be, in charge of democracy through their votes, are correct, and Justin Trudeau is not. But like these people are like they're sniffing their own farts, huffing their own jankum, mass consumption and distribution of hubris, and incapable of accepting any of this. So if you turn around and criticize them, like Mr. Schwab with his own book, whom Justin Trudeau is an acolyte of,
Hmm.
you're the bad guy. You're a misinformation and disinformation agent, Richard, for
Yep.
even reading the Great Reset or talking about it. That book wasn't for you. It's not for the little people.
Well, if it wasn't for me, why was it on sale at Amazon and why could I access it? But what I found interesting is that when the book was released, a whole bunch, oh, there you go. When the book was released, a whole bunch of people did get it for free, and they were all members of government in Western countries. It arrived express, boom, there you go. This is and it's basically, if you read it, it's the playbook how we're going to do this. And so, anyway, but we don't have, and then so what happened was, so around the summer of 2020, I said, well, we got to do something about this and put it, because even before the mandates came here in Saskatchewan, I knew they were coming because I could see what they were doing in other parts of the country or in other parts of the world as this was advancing, and they were talking about the lockdowns, and and the social distancing was already in there, and masking and all that stuff, and then of course they were already trial ballooning the vaccine that will save us all. So anyway, I started protesting in summer of 2020. I met a whole bunch of like-minded people here in Saskatchewan. So we started holding rallies, but then they brought the mandates in, and what they did to try to do to stop us from getting together and talking, in groups about what was going on, First, of course, the censorship on social media. They started bringing that in the summer of 2020. So if you started saying maybe this isn't what everybody thinks it is, boom, you'd be kicked off social media. And then next, they brought in the mandates saying you couldn't gather you couldn't gather even outside in groups of more than five and stuff like that, or eight. They would just name a number, and it didn't matter from province to province or in the states, from state to state. Every place had their own way of dealing with it. And there's other places in the states, like, and so this is when I really started going, hey, come on now. Other places that were wide open, like in South Dakota, Wyoming, and all that stuff, they didn't even bring this in. In Florida, they brought in at the start, but then they said, no, this is ridiculous because Ron DeSantis was a leading voice in this, and he convened a roundtable about how to deal with this, and he brought in dissident scientists and health professionals who said, hey, no, we shouldn't do it the way they're talking about. These lockdowns are a bad idea. They'll be bad for society. They'll cause more problems than they'll solve, right? And so Florida was wide open right away too. And so and then they and Tom Woods famously, who wrote a book, I got it here, it's called Diary of a Psychosis. Tom Woods, you should read that book. But I was following him. He's a libertarian guy in the States. And I was following what he was doing because he started getting the data and he went, hey, wait a minute. The rate of infection and deaths and all that stuff is no different from Florida to California, but California's got complete lockdowns and Florida's wide open, and there's no difference in the data. And more data started coming in. And even by the summer of 2020, famously, we knew that already by then that this wasn't as bad as they were saying it was, but they kept pretending like it was. And they kept censoring, and they really wanted to censor ways of treating this COVID-19 outbreak besides the vaccine, which they were planning. So they started censoring all other ways of dealing with it, like the ivermectin, the hydrochloroquine, and all that stuff. And they started this hospital protocol, or if you went to the hospital, they didn't treat you for pneumonia. They put you in a bed. They told you if it gets worse, they either would send you home if it gets worse, come back when it's too late, or they were just putting people into COVID wards, slapping ventilators on them and waiting for them to die. It was like
Yeah, the
unbelievable.
ventilators was an incredible mistake. They killed a lot of people with that.
Yeah.
I was a victim of that censorship too. I got kicked off Twitter. Oh man, 4 times in the last few years. Most of I'd come and go back, and it was mostly because of COVID stuff and objecting to the excesses of Justin Trudeau. And I had the RCMP call me. I think I might have mentioned this when I was on your show, Richard. That I
Oh, you can call me RB.
RB I
Yeah. The only person who calls me Richard is my wife, and that's when I know I'm in trouble.
okay.
It's Richard Brent Winteringham, but everybody calls me RB or Brent. And yeah, like I said, if I hear Richard, I get nervous because that means I did something wrong. But go
Yeah,
on.
so you know, I was sending mean tweets to the prime minister, got me on some kind of list with the RCMP Protective
Oh,
Investigations Unit.
geez.
And even though I live in the United States now, and I have since 2016 full time, they tracked my number down and called me and asked me to stop sending those mean tweets. And I told the RCMP constable, my grandfather drove a tank across Europe to defend my right to express myself. And
Exactly.
I don't think I'm going to stop doing what I want. And I'm in the United States, where I'm also protected by the First Amendment. And
Hmm.
I appreciate the call. I was nice to him, but I'm like, no.
Yeah. So anyway, when we started doing these rallies, and that's an interesting point you make. When we started doing these rallies in Saskatoon, and down here in Saskatoon at Besborough Park, we have a Vimy Memorial dedicated to the Vimy Ridge Battle, where the Canadian Army first distinguished itself in World War I as the best bulwark against the Germans, and we came up with we came up with a great victory in Vimy, and a lot of Canadians died. And this was in World War One, even before World War Two, of course. So they put up this memorial to that. And so when we decided to do our rallies, that's where we would meet, because Mark Friesen, the Grizzly Patriot, one of the guys who helped us with our organizing these rallies, mentioned that all the time. He said, "This we have to do this. This is our duty as citizens." To fight against something we know is wrong, because there's soldiers who laid their lives down for us so we could have a free and democratic society. Could we so we could have a system where we could redress what we perceived as what the government if the government was doing something wrong, we should be able to meet, publicly, and be able to discuss these topics. And when they start trying to limit that, there's a problem, especially when they're using the old tried and tactic of we're doing this for your own good, because that's what they always do in totalitarian societies. That was one of the important in Nazi Germany in the 1930s. They would break up meetings by saying this is for your safety, right? And the Nazi regime in the 1930s first rolled out their idea, their first totalitarian things is controlling the population through eugenics and things like that. So, I mean, like Albert Camus wrote a book called The Plague in 1948, another book I read.
I've read it. Yes, it's a
Yeah.
good one. Yeah.
Yeah. And so when you read books like that and you're aware of how societies in the past use crises like this, health crises or whatever, plagues, to consolidate their own power and to make the peasants pay for their own mistakes. And he
Yeah,
wrote a book.
the
Yeah,
plague the plague was an analogy about the Nazi occupation of France.
exactly.
Yeah, La Peste. But, I think you can read what Camus is saying about the authorities. Oh, I'm trying to remember the name of the sort of town he was talking about in Algeria or Algiers, where the book is set, but it, it's a warning about the excesses of the sort of managerial state, and again, the things they can do to make us go against our own principles,
Yes.
turn us all into raving psychos, instead of focusing on the problem itself, right?
Hmm. Yeah.
Instead, they teach you to fear the problem and to be fearful and to just take orders rather than approach things logically, reasonably. And
Don't do your own research.
no, don't do your own research. No, La Peste by Camus is an excellent book, highly recommended reading to everybody. So you're in Saskatchewan, you're going to these protests,
Hmm.
and you're meeting these other people. I wonder if you ever bumped into my buddy Trent. He lives in Saskatoon. I don't know if he ever went to any of the protests, but he's a trucker. He lives in West Saskatoon. Good guy. Um, but eventually, you get punished somewhere along the way with a number of other people in one particular incident, correct?
Well, it was a very important thing. So in March 20 of 21, the year following, so that winter, they brought in the lockdowns and everything, and these prescriptions against gathering in public. So we did a series of underground town halls of that winter and spring throughout Saskatchewan and Alberta. Me and Mark would go on the road, and I would do a speech about COVID, and he would do a speech about the UN Sustainable Development Agenda 2030, and all that, and join it all together. And we would educate people across the province in farmers' shops, in converted slaughterhouses, in people's businesses, in their back rooms, late at night, 8 o'clock, And there was one famous one where we were going to do we were going to a farmer's barn to do a presentation, and the farmer canceled at the last minute because the local RCMP had heard that he was going to do this and phoned him up and gave him a warning, so he canceled it. And we just thought, this is crazy. This is like in Nazi Germany or Soviet Russia, where you have to sneak around and talk, in private about these things, and be fearful of the police breaking up your meetings. It was unbelievable. But anyway, so then we decided to screw it, and we went and we started doing public rallies despite that. And that's when we started getting the fines, $2,800 fines. Now I ended up getting 8 tickets. Mark got 10, I think. We had a woman in southern Saskatchewan who ended up getting 11, and they did a write up in her at the Western Standard. Tamara Lavoie was her name. They called her the Queen of Fines. Anyway, but in March 20th, 21, we had the big one. We had a big, huge Saskatoon Freedom Rally. We called it the big one, where we got 1,500 people out, and there was speakers from across the country that flew in. Laura Lynn Tyler Thompson, Artur Pawlowski, who was famous for what he was doing in Alberta. Um, and so we had a whole series of speakers that came in for this big event. It was a huge one, and 1,500 people showed up. And the newspaper tried to, the local newspaper and local media tried not to let any facts come out about it, but they had to cover it to a certain point because we coordinated with the police and had a march after the rally through downtown Saskatoon. We stopped traffic. It was an incredible thing. So this group in Prince Albert said, "Hey, can you guys come up to Prince Albert and do one? Because our group here, we only got 12 or 13 people. We're trying to do a rally where we can really, you know, make our presence felt." So we went up to Prince Albert the next week and did one there, and that was where we did it. We had 4 speakers, and we did that again, and about 300 or 400 people showed up, and the cops were monitoring us and everything. And of course, we got more tickets out of that. But so that when that rally was on a Saturday, and there was a nurse called Jackie Marshall that had showed up to that too, and she was supporting us, but she was trying to stay in the background, right? She didn't want her picture taken, but at one point she got her picture taken with some of the group. I think it was with Mark. She got a picture taken with Mark. So she goes back to work in Shellbrook, Saskatchewan, and we all go back to do our thing. So the rally was on a Saturday. Sunday goes by. She goes to work on Monday. She goes to work on Tuesday. She goes to work on Wednesday. On Thursday, she goes to work, and they confront her, and they show her a picture of her being at this rally, right? And so, since you were at this rally, we want to give you a PCR test to make sure you didn't get COVID. Okay, now listen to this part. This is where it gets crazy. So she's panicked. They actually cornered her in the bathroom and tried to force her to take this PCR test. She refused. She got on the phone. She called her daughter. Her daughter called me because she knew me from the rally and said, "Well, this is what's going on. My mother is being forced to take a P." She said, does she have to take it?" And I said, "No, because you have bodily autonomy. You do not have to take a medical procedure against your will, especially if there's no." She had no symptoms of having this dread disease. And as we all know, how they use the PCR technique is it's not meant for diagnosis, as the inventor of the PCR, Kerry Mullis, famously said. It can The way they use this is they can magnify it they magnify it, and if they run it at so many cycles, they can get anything they want out of it. They can find any virus in your body they want, and it's only positive or negative. So if 6 weeks ago you had a cold, it would show up. You could test positive for COVID, but it's not COVID because there's 90% of these PCR diagnoses are actually false positives, and there was already a paper out about how bad these PCRs were for diagnosis, and everybody who knew about this kind of knew it, but the general public didn't. They actually believed this PCR test worked. Now, they didn't think back in history. Of course, nobody ever had a test for the flu or the cold. You had the symptoms, you went to the doctor, they said drink fluids and get plenty of rest, and that's how they dealt. Anyway, so she phones me. She refuses to take it, and then that day, the Saskatchewan Health Authority on that Thursday released this, and they publicized it that there was a possible positive infection at the Prince Albert rally, and anybody who was there now has to quarantine for 14 days. Now, this is 6 days after the fact, of course. So people who were at that rally had already been out all over the place, gone to Cabela's, had gone to all the grocery stores, had gone back to work. So if it was already out of the bag, it was too late anyway. It was a complete joke. And I got a call and I was working as a caretaker at an elementary school at that time, and I got a call from my union rep saying, "Okay, Brent, this was Thursday night. You have to, everything you've touched, you have to swab down, and you have to go home and stay home for 14 days because you were at this rally, which was really ridiculous. Okay. So there was no positive test. What they had done was they tried to make Jackie take the test. She refused to take the test. They put out the press release anyway saying there was a possible positive infection, but there wasn't, and they didn't even say a positive infection for what, but this is their way to go after us. And so that Saturday coming up in Saskatoon, we had a kids' day in the park because one of the organizers of our group, Donna Todd, we called her our warrior grandma. She had gotten sick and tired of the kids because the kids weren't allowed to play together, right? Remember, they weren't allowed to go to the parks. They'd shut down all the parks. They'd shut down all the sporting activities. You weren't allowed to play your musical instruments in the schools. And so she decided we're going to organize this day in the park for kids, right? And have all the kids show up and fly in the face of these authorities saying even by, of course, and by then, this was in March of 2021, we knew that kids were least affected by COVID. The New Yorker magazine had done a whole series about this, talking about how kids are not in any danger of this, and what we're doing to them is going to really infect their mental health, physical health, all kinds of horrible things. So we decided to have a kids' day in the park with activities, face painting, all that stuff, right? And I went down to it even though I wasn't supposed to, and I got photographed down there. I ended up getting fired from my job for doing that because I defied their orders. And it was a big controversy. So I ended up getting fired, ended up getting all these tickets. We kept doing the rallies and kept fighting and everything. And then, of course, everything changed with the Freedom Convoy. People had finally had enough, especially with the vaccine mandates. When that came in, there was a palpable fear across the community. We did town halls where people were showing up. What am I supposed to do? My boss, if I don't take this test, they're going to fire me and all this stuff. And people were freaking out because a lot of people are smart enough to realize, hey, they rushed this COVID-19 vaccine through trials without proper testing. We knew that then, and they were trying to force everybody to take it as a condition of employment. And they were saying, well, it's your choice. This was coercion. If they're holding your job over your head, it's coercion.
Yeah,
it's wrong.
that was one of the most, well, speaking of, you brought up George Orwell earlier, the inversion of language, right?
Yes.
Or the altering the meaning, altering the commonly understood meanings of words was a fixture of the Ministry of Truth in 1984. And they've basically took the idea of coercion and nuked it. They just said, no, being threatened with losing your job is not force. That's not coercion. It's a choice, and you have consequences for the choices you make. Not, my choice is to either have a job or not have one, be able to feed my kids or not. And they literally, just totally ripped apart the idea of coercion to suit their own ends. Like, these people are pretty evil. And that part you mentioned about, the way the media phrased this possible infection based on cornering this woman and her refusing to take a test.
Yeah.
I hold the Canadian media, like, I hate Justin Trudeau and I hate the government and all the provincial premiers. They're all shitbags, and I would see all of them swinging from trees if it was up to me.
Yeah, I hear you.
And I mean that I'm never taking that back. I would really like to see that. Full Robespierre on their asses. But the media are worse. So one of the reasons I've become somewhat kind of well known on the internet here is I reported on the Coots stuff, right? Like,
that's right.
Talked to Margaret McKay, talked to Jackie Martin, talked to Nikki Tom, all these people involved. I was in regular contact with the guys. I was the first person to get any comment from the defense side of that case, from the men or their families, into any mainstream media. I wrote multiple articles about them in Newsweek. The Canadian media, through everything that happened downstream of Coots, never spoke with the men or their families or their advocates or anybody on the defense side of that case. Ever. Zero.
They were considered guilty before.
Right. The CBC claimed to try to talk to them twice, but, after the CBC engaged in the smear operation against them at the beginning of all of this, their families and advocates told the CBC rightly to pound sand, right? But none of the other media, and I hold, people like Bill Graveland, who's this guy who writes for Canadian Press, I was reading all of his stuff because it was just going out on the wire. So every little newspaper and other media organization in Canada would just reprint what Graveland wrote.
Yeah.
And he would omit stuff from the trial. He never talked about the fact that Tony Oleanick or Jerry Morin were kept in solitary pre-trial solitary confinement. No criminal records, denied bail, never talked about the fact that 77% of the judges in this country are appointed by the Liberal Party and the whole thing is corrupt.
Yeah.
How those guys were denied bail. And then when they got found not guilty, so Morin and Chris Lysak get let out on plea deals that have nothing to do with the conspiracy to murder charges. And then Tony Oleanick and Chris Carbert both get found not guilty of the conspiracy to murder police officers. None of these people ask why. None of these people go back and say, wow, we put four of these guys in jail for 2 years before their trial even got started for a charge that they beat. What happened here? How did Canada allow itself to have blatantly political prisoners? They don't ask these questions, right? They just told the government line. There's this other woman that writes for the Globe and Mail. Her name is Alana Smith, and she's the health reporter based in Calgary, and she's fat, of course, because everybody involved in health now is obese because that's who we get it. You know, the world is run by single fat ladies, which is a whole other. That's a whole other podcast. But
and I just want to quickly interject: the California Minister of Health was on the other side. She was sickly, but very thin, right? But
right, yeah, no, none of these health people are ever actually healthy, and they won't countenance anything except the science.
Yeah.
And so what we see here is we
Trademark.
have trademark, and there's a term I've become familiar with called scientism. It's
Yes.
it's this sort of it's this tendency to not question science at all. I mean, science is a process. It's not like
Right.
a statement. It's not an endpoint. It's a process, and it's always changing, and you're always questioning things, and you're always doing experiments, and you're always, trying to make sure that you're correct. Right? It's not.
Right.
It's not just set in stone. But these people are taking it to be like tablets handed down from God Himself.
That's
So
right.
thus scientism. And so, that bleeds over into other things, and they worship the government in the same way. So,
Yes.
the Canadian media trashed the Freedom Convoy, completely abdicated in their duty to ask questions about what went on with the Coots guys, smeared them, totally ignored we had political prisoners, like literal gulag situation in Canada. Nope, we're not talking about that. Nope, we're not even going to talk to the people on the defense side of this case, even though the goddamn thing went on for almost 3 years. And Tony Oleanick and Chris Carbert are still in jail on trumped-up charges.
And of course, the travesty of Pat King,
Yep.
Tamara Leach, Chris Barber,
Marco Van Hugenbos, yeah.
yeah, the people they picked out and made examples of, right? And then going for maximum sentences for these people like they're terrorists.
Right,
Of course,
and then they've done that to you, right? Because you
Yes.
still have like these outstanding fines
yeah,
simply for being outside and speaking up about this stuff. Like, how much money does the province of Saskatchewan want out of you?
well, I got 8 tickets, and at the end, it was a total of $45,700. And the thing was, when we went to court to fight these things, and the Justice Center for Constitutional Freedoms took up my case, we would go in to fight these things, and the judge would say, "Okay, this is what the public health is saying, and I'm taking that as sacrosanct." Well, we have this countervailing evidence from other professionals, health professionals, other doctors, other scientists who are saying, "No, what the public health did was wrong." And here is our facts: the judges in all my cases, in all our cases here in Saskatchewan, would not allow it in as moot points because we didn't know that at the time, and we have to go by what public health says. And so we find that public health is right in every case, and so they don't even allow countervailing evidence in. So it was just a rubber stamp. It wasn't trials before a jury either. It was just before the judge. And the judge, of course, as you say, they're politically appointed. We don't have elected judges here in Canada. It's one of the greatest failings of our system. So these judges are on orders from the government, and of course, so they just rubber stamped it. So yeah, 8 tickets, $45,700, and I can't pay them. So of course I have a give send go to help me because All these tickets, of course, they've gone to the credit, the CRA, the credit the Commercial Credit Adjustment Bureau here in Canada. They go after you for these, so they're and they sent a letter, of course, to Revenue Canada. So I'm not getting any income tax returns or carbon credit returns. I don't get. They just keep that from me. So I'm paying taxes without getting any of my taxes back. And of course, they're going to try to garnish my wages and all that stuff. So I'm still working as a truck driver. I had to go back to truck driving, and it's a tough thing for an old 61-year-old guy like me to go back on the road like this after I've been off the road for so long. But I had to do it because I still had my 1A, and it's a way to make money. That's a tough job, and my back's gone, and my knee's gone, and everything. And uh, I work for a wonderful company actually that supports what I do, and the employees there like me, and so they do their best for me. But it's still a tough job. It's working with flat decks, loading lumber, loading steel, chaining chains and straps and tarps and all that stuff.
Oh
I mean,
yeah, that's
you know the
that's hard work. That's how I started when I was in high school. I used to do that at night in
yeah.
Hamilton. I'd help the local guys and the highway guys chain and tarp loads of coils at Stelco, Tofasco, and the other
Yeah.
secondary processing plants and send them on their way. Yeah,
But anyways, but
it's hard work.
see what's crazy about here in Canada is they're doubling down on all this stuff. But in the meantime, throughout the rest of the world, especially the United States, the countervailing evidence has come out. They have had commissions in the in England. They're doing a COVID commission. In Scotland, they did a COVID commission, and of course, the United States have had they've called Tony Fauci in and asked him tough questions and stuff, and it's reversing. People are realizing they were lied to. It's across the rest of the world, but here in Canada, they're not allowing it. Famously, it just came out. Alberta released a COVID report saying that they're now recommending we stop with the mRNA vaccines. They're now saying it was how they handled the pandemic was completely wrong. So there is that. So it's slowly dripping, dripping, dripping that it's
So,
changing. But
so speaking of that report and
yes,
that advisory panel in Alberta, this same reporter from the Calgary Bureau of the Globe and Mail,
mm,
Alana Smith, our obese little health reporter, she and someone else wrote an article in the Globe and Mail castigating province of Alberta for listening to cranks and anti-vaxxers and disinformation people. So, like, basically, if you don't go along with what happened and how it was orchestrated by the feds at the time, like they're just going to keep accusing anybody into the future. Any new government comes along, any new review of this, anything that goes against what the government was doing at the time, they're just going to keep fighting it into perpetuity. Like they're never going to admit that they're wrong.
I know. So anyway, but famously, this was the we knew how we now know it was all political. Is when the Freedom Convoy happened, it started a cascade across the world, but especially, of course, here in Canada mostly. And here in Saskatchewan, what it did was the Saskatchewan government, the Sask party is in charge of our government. They're supposedly a conservative government, and they started getting a lot of pushback from their grassroots, which is their base, the farmers, the rural people, right? And they basically said, we're done with you. If you don't change your ways, you're done. The donations dried up everything. So as just before they brought in the Emergency Act and cracked down on the farmers, on the truckers in Ottawa, we organized a rally here in Saskatchewan to go down to Regina to help, to mirror what was going on in Ottawa. So thousands of truckers went down to Regina. As we're driving down to Regina to do this big rally in Regina, it comes out over the radio that Scott Moe, with a stroke of the pen, has gotten rid of all mandates, all restrictions, everything's done, and we're going back to normal. He didn't ask Sadiq Shahab, who is our health minister, if it was okay, or not a health minister, but the chief public health official. He didn't ask Paul Merriman, who was the health official, if it was okay. He just did it with a stroke of the pen, proving it was political all the time. He could have done that at any time, said enough of this. So that proves it was all political. But anyway, so we go down to Regina, and I'm giving this speech out in front of the legislature here in Regina, thanking Scott Moe for finally coming to his senses and all that stuff. And I decided not to go after him personally that day because I thought it was a celebration. Thousands of people waving their flags, driving their trucks up and down.
No, you were extending Premier Moe some grace.
Yes, exactly. And so when I gave that speech, I thanked him. I thanked all these other people, and I said, "Now we've turned the corner. It is time to, get back to common sense and all that stuff." But later on, since that time and since that stroke of the pen, getting rid of all the mandates and restrictions, he never turned back the tide of the justice system still going after us here in the province. He said, I guess he's trying to say, well, I don't want to have anything to do with that because I got to stay independent and let the courts do what they do. But the courts are under orders from from wherever that they cannot let this go, and so they're going after us.
Yeah, I'm really upset about this sort of tendency, and Moe's not the only one, right? Like Danielle
Doug
Smith,
Ford.
Doug Ford, all these people have abdicated their responsibility to, advocate or defend their citizens. Now, there's some argument about like, oh, they're not supposed to interfere in federal stuff, but they do have platforms, they do have influence. Danielle Smith's been like running scared of the NDP ever since like they accused her of like being involved or listening to somebody they don't like, and there was almost like a conflict of interest thing. But Danielle Smith is a coward. I don't know enough about Scott Moe. Doug Ford's a retard. I mean, over and above the COVID stuff, like he was totally on board with Justin Trudeau. He was
Yep.
totally on board with the feds working with the Americans because, like, Joe Biden and Pete Buttigieg were heavily involved in negotiations with the Canadian government to get Windsor open and Coutts opened up, even though there was still trucks could go to other border crossings. There was two border crossings with not far away from Coutts that you could detour to and cross the border. Michigan, you could go to Sarnia. The borders were never actually closed. All their claims about economic impact are bullshit.
Hmm.
And Joe Biden, fuck you, Joe Biden. I'm glad you're gone because Joe Biden worked with Justin Trudeau to crush the right to free expression, assembly, and protest of my fellow Canadians. And Doug Ford went right along with it. And Doug Ford went right along with Justin Trudeau handing out all kinds of money for electronic vehicle plants and battery plants and all of these,
Well,
subsidies and grants.
did, did,
And
didn't Doug Ford have an interest in a sign making company that made all the COVID-19 decals?
oh, maybe, but I mean that's small potatoes like, compared to the EV and battery plant stuff that Trudeau was like, oh, we're going to build these plants and give this money to Honda and give this money to whatever company that does batteries. And then the factories never come. They end up opening in the U.S. instead after
Yeah.
billions of dollars goes out the door. Doug Ford approved all of that. They just take our money and flush it down the toilet for virtue signaling,
Yeah.
right? Like these people, they're the worst. Like Canada is ruled by the worst people on planet Earth. Like there's some curse, and I'm not sure what's going to fix it, right? Like so we have this, Trudeau says he's going to resign, the prorogues parliament, no accountability right now, and then Trump's taking advantage of this, talking about tariffs. Like Trump's not stupid. He sees a strategic advantage in needling Canada while Trudeau is, fumbling around with his own departure. We're not going to get to vote Trudeau out because he's resigning, so he's never going to face any, electoral accountability. They're trying to parachute this Mark Carney guy in, who was at one time the governor of the Bank of Canada, the governor of the Bank of England, corporatist to the core, and also totally bought into this climate alarmism nonsense, like net zero emissions by 2050. He's basically going to nuke the energy industry in Alberta and BC and Saskatchewan. And, the Liberals are like, oh, anybody can sign up to become a member of the Liberal Party and vote. And what do? This Indian fella, Arya, they just
Hmm.
disqualified him yesterday, so he's gone.
Yeah.
They're probably going to do the same to this Ruby Dahlia woman. Like they have their three pre-selected candidates, two of whom are there for show, Chrystia Freeland and Karina Gould. They're not going to win. Like Carney has been chosen. Carney is a WEF stooge.
He's got the big money behind him.
Got the big money, and they're all celebrating. Oh, we're gonna have this banker, and he's gonna get our economics back on track. Who put it off track?
Exactly.
Who screwed it up? You guys,
Yeah.
right? And
And
like,
Mark Carney was always heavily involved in it too. He was one of their consultants, and his wife is on a board that makes money off of the climate alarmism. I mean, it's unbelievable. But getting quickly back to what happened in Saskatchewan with that thing, proving it was all political, and um, everybody went back. This is where everybody went back home and said, "Okay, it's over." It's not over. They're still pushing all this stuff. Of course, the thing going now is the avian flu they're trying to push, and they're going onto poultry farms and testing. The federal government is going back, he is just invading people's private farms and testing these chickens and whatever and pigs or whatever with this PCR. And there's this ostrich farm thing going on out in BC right now where they want to cull all these people who own these ostriches. They want to go in and kill them all on February 1st, 25th, because two of the birds tested positive for avian flu. So they're doubling down and they're trying to whip up the next pandemic already to try to control the population. It's unbelievable. I don't know what we can do to stop it, but like you said, but famously, I think we know what's going on with these premiers. They're being either blackmailed, threatened, or paid. But what famously, remember Doug Ford in 2022 said that if you go against, he did this press conference. He said if you go against the health advisories, or if you go against what's going on, this COVID-19 pandemic response, if you go against it, you might as well throw a rope over a bridge and hang yourself from it. And I remember thinking at the time, going, does that mean your political career, Doug, or does that mean literally? Are you being threatened? Is your family being threatened and you're going along with this? Do they have
well,
blackmail
and
on you?
what a wonderful thing for Premier Ford to say,
Yeah,
given the massive mental health crisis that was brought to us by the COVID response and the
exactly.
actions of our governments and the people who did commit suicide. Oh, what's another problem we have in Canada right now? MAID, medical assistance in dying, which is now what, the
Yes.
fourth or fifth leading cause of death is the government assisting people leaving this mortal coil? And Doug Ford just tells people to go hang themselves? Oh, I can't. I hold these people in such utter contempt. Like I'm gonna have to stop talking because my show will get canceled off Spotify or something from what I'm gonna say. Oh my god!
Yeah,
Pardon the coughing.
that's all right.
So
And that's
RB, another thing I wanted to ask you about while we're here. You got yourself on Jimmy Dore's show. How'd that happen?
well, I've been following Jimmy for a decade, maybe, for 10 years. Because I'm like him. I consider myself a lefty, a left winger. I was a socialist. Tommy Douglas was my hero growing up, but also basically a classic liberal, right? Believing in freedom of speech, freedom of association, freedom to redress government wrongs, anti-censorship. I've been an anti-war activist all my life. So Jimmy Dore he was simpatico with my views. So I became a member on his channel. And I became kind of a person. I'd write him emails when the COVID, because he famously ended up going along with the COVID thing at the start because he was terrified, right? And he admits he was wrong, and he went along with it. And he went and got vaccinated, and he got vax injured, and that what woke him up, right? And so I started writing emails to him, and then eventually I did some call-in shows, and then he came and did a tour, and he did a comedy set in Edmonton. And me and my wife jumped in a vehicle. We went to Edmonton, had one of our freedom fighter friends set us up at a B&B, and we stayed there overnight. And we went to his show, and I met him at the show, told him what was going on. He was freaking amazed at what was happening. He said, I can't believe this is still happening. So about a few months later, I got on. I finally got on his show, and I told him my story, and Jimmy's a great guy, and he's advocating for us Canadians suffering through this stuff. He just had Sarah Chajonian on, one of the frontline nurses, who's also fighting this stuff and being attacked by her the College of Physicians and Nurses going
Yeah,
after her.
it's interesting if you go on Jimmy's Rumble channel and there's like, episodes and there's like a bunch
Yeah,
of squares and each one's got the little description and
yeah,
it's all like, it's a little bit he does the sort of like, provocative clickbait titles and stuff,
hmm
everyone does that, that's fine. But like it's like US politics, US politics, US politics, US politics, Trudeau, truckers being persecuted, US politics,
yeah,
US politics, like every
yeah,
every once in a while, some Canadian thing is dropped in there. So yeah, thanks, Mr. Dorr. I
yeah.
I met him. He played. There's a town not far from here, Cortland, New York, and he performed there last year. And me and my buddy Micah went to go see him do his stand-up set. So
You've been on his show too, right? He talked to you about.
yeah, yeah, he saw my stuff in Newsweek, and their producers reached out to me and asked me to come on, and I was happy to tell them the sort of the Coots stuff and
Yeah,
everything else that's going on. Um, I just had an article out in the Blaze here in the U.S., which was
awesome.
Glenn Beck's sort of baby over there about Marco Van Huygenbos and Pat King.
hmm
And there's another magazine here in the US I write for called Compact. Hopefully, something this week. Same stuff. What's going on with Trudeau's fake resignation and the further persecutions of people again, Marco Van Huygenbos and Pat King. And I'm trying to like make sure Americans understand that, 3 years later, and Freedom Convoy people are still being punished, still being put in jail, still being harassed. And, the thing with Marco Van Huygenbos, like, all he did was try to act as a liaison between the Coots protesters and the law.
hmm
Guy's a town councilor, like, sort of politics and diplomacy is part of his job. And, dealing with the cops, dealing with provincial authorities, like that's literally what the guy does for a living. Or it did until he stepped down. And they threw him in jail for it. They
Yeah,
just
I
said,
know.
no, no, you're a leader now, you're going to jail. And, Pat King, you can have a fair criticism of Pat King, his style, the things he says. I'm sure we all disagree with Pat King about something. That's
Yeah.
fine. You don't put the guy in jail for being famous on TikTok, right?
Well,
Like,
yeah, he was. They tried to call him like one of the organizers or whatever, but he wasn't. He just went along with it, and he was live streaming it the whole time.
right.
He never claimed to be a leader or one of the organizers, and he was just doing live streaming of what his experience was on this trail. And we got to meet all through his channel. A lot of people got to meet some of the people that were involved with it. They got to meet just what was going on, and what they were seeing was a celebration of people getting together and trying to fight back against what the government was doing. And it was nonviolent. It was peaceful. There was bouncy castles. They were playing street hockey in the streets. They were cleaning up after themselves, keeping the streets clean while they were there. Of course, the honking might have been a bothersome, but eventually they put through that thing saying no honking, and people went along with it. And anyway, it was not violent or threatening in any way. Now, there's this one controversial thing that they were trying to get people to sign, and I remember Lynette Fair-Classen, who was down there at the time, wondering whether she should sign it or not. But there's some kind of like document saying that our demands are that the government resigns immediately and stuff. And what the government tried to do is take whoever might have signed on to that letter was involved in seditious conspiracy. So there was that they tried to point to. But what really helped them bring in the Emergencies Act, of course, was misrepresenting what was going on in Coots, Joe Biden pressuring Trudeau to do something about this, because what was happening was this was getting to be a worldwide phenomenon. There were copycat freedom convoys in the Netherlands and Germany and England. People were following what was going on, and the Canadian Freedom Convoy became an inspiration to fight against authoritarianism COVID authoritarianism across the world. People, Trudeau is being pressured from the World Economic Forum and from the UN and from Joe Biden and all these Five Eyes countries, the Jacinda Ardens and all that, to do something about it. That's why he brought in the Emergencies Act. They were terrified. The Canadian Freedom Convoy might have saved the world because right after that happened, when he did bring in the horses, it showed their weakness. If the only way they could talk to these people who had a legitimate concern about these vaccine mandates and these other restrictions was just to bring in the thugs and crack their skulls, it showed their weakness. Because a true leader, if Justin Trudeau had been a true leader, he would have met with he would have set a time, he would have met with the organizers, heard their concerns, and maybe none of this could have happened. Maybe we could have settled this with negotiations and with diplomacy, but it never happened. It never even entered his mind. He pretended he had COVID and hid away in his cottage while all this was going on.
No, no, no. This is the thing. Like, people have to understand, Western countries are no longer democracies. They're no, the United States is still kind of a republic, and thank God for President Trump coming along here and starting to clean house. But most of the West now it's run by like a managerial regime and a caste of people who believe they are above democratic contestation. There's a great writer in the United States you got to look up. His name is Michael Lind, Lind. And Mr. Lind he's kind of a sort of populist, came from the left, and pro labor, pro worker, pro regular normal person. And he wrote this article one time about the misconceptions around who's actually orchestrating all of the bad stuff we're seeing in society. And he said, like, Bernie Sanders and Occupy are wrong about the 1% versus the 99%, right? I can't remember if it was 10 or 20, but Lind basically said the problem is the 10% of the people that work directly for the 1%, the managerial administrative state. They're a separate caste. They go to all elite schools. They come from the same sort of number of families for the most part. And they don't believe that the rest of us should have any say. We are technocrats. We are experts. We are the scientists. We are the accountants. We are the corporate managers. What we say goes. And all of those people either work for corporations or government, and when those two things work together, that's corporatism, which is one of the, essential pillars of like OG fascism, the corporate.
Well,
Benito Mussolini's, yeah.
Mussolini famously said that's what fascism is the uniting the corporate state with the political state. That's fascism.
Right, yeah, and that's what we're living under now.
That's right. Yeah. So anyway, going back to the Jimmy Dore thing, so what I found amazing is because both me and him shared the same story. On the left, we see what happens to the left. The left, we didn't leave the left left us.
Yep.
And we're starting to realize that if this is we got to get back to a class consciousness. We got to start talking about the workers' rights across the political spectrum. There's no longer a left or right. That's a false paradigm that they use to keep us under control and have us fight against each other and have us fight over all those stupid issues like transgenderism and women in sports and all this other stuff and these culture issues that keep us divided with. We have to put that aside. Frederick Douglass, a famous freed black slave who was very famous in the 1860s during the Civil War, advocating for the rights of freed slaves. He said that a lot of people would why are you working with Abraham Lincoln because he's a racist and all this stuff. And Frederick Douglass said, I would unite with anybody to do right and with nobody to do wrong. So where your interests align, you should join together. You don't have to agree on everything. But the most important thing is we have to get back to a representative democracy where people unite around these issues that are most important, like freedom of speech, like taxation without representation, and that's a big one because in Canada we're taxed so heavily that it's punitive. Gas prices, grocery prices, people can barely get by. Average people are living paycheck to paycheck. One emergency could send them into a tailspin. I mean, one thing, and the United States is even worse. I think 70% of bankruptcies are medical bankruptcies in the United States. At least we have our universal health care, even though they're doing their best to kill that too. And the other problem, of course, is when you have this healthcare system that is supposedly free, nothing is free. You pay with it for your taxes. But when it's social, these hard-headed socialists take over the healthcare system, decide to implement these measures without you having able to fight back against it. That shows the dangers of a socialized healthcare system. Is what happened to us under COVID in Canada. Like it was laid bare. At least in the United States, it was much like you had Jay Bhattacharya and Martin Kulldorff of Harvard, of course, the Great Barrington Declaration. But you had other ones like Pierre Corey and Dr. Ryan Cole and all these other doctors, Dr. Samin Gold, getting together and fighting back against it. That didn't happen in Canada. Anybody famously, right at the start of COVID, the Manitoba, the previous Manitoba Health Commissioner was being interviewed by CBC, and they started talking about this COVID thing. And he said, "I don't understand what's going on. We always have a pandemic every year. It's called the flu season, right? And we've always dealt with it in other ways." And he started He started criticizing what they were doing, bringing in these pandemic restrictions, and they cut him off. They say the CBC just they cut him off. Said, "Well, we can't talk to him anymore because he's trying to make sense." But so what happened in Canada is the World Health Organization in every province has a health minister, and then they have their chief public health official, right? In Canada, for instance, Dr. Theresa Tam, she came from the World Health Organization, and she had to sign a non-disclosure agreement before she became the chief public health officer of Canada. She had to sign a non-disclosure agreement of what went on with the World Health Organization, where she got her training. Here in Saskatchewan, our chief health doctor, Sadiq Shahab, got his training at he's from Pakistan, right? And he got his training at the Johns Hopkins Center for Health Security. He's a bureaucrat. He's not a scientist. He's a failed plastic surgeon from Pakistan. Why is he running our health system here in Saskatchewan? A failed and he's a bureaucrat is all he is. And he's fat. He's not healthy. He couldn't even put on a mask properly when he was trying to show everybody how to put on a mask. It's completely ridiculous. So our public health system is being run not by Canadians. It's being run by the World Health Organization. Is our media is not being run for and by Canadians. It's being run for and by the bureaucratic elite that run everything, because the UN the UN and media groups across Western countries signed a UN compact, a UN media compact a few years ago. I think it was in 2018, actually, when they signed this. So for messaging, right? So famously, one person will write one thing, and then it's like just gets repeated, like you were saying before. So that is what we're up against. We can't. We're fighting against a monolith here, and it's getting a little bit crazy. But anyway, that's what we have to do, is we have to
I
organize along class lines.
Yeah, I remember when the left was against transnational, global corporate
Exactly.
institutions interfering in local sovereign politics. Remember those days, RB?
I remember those days. I marched in the streets against NAFTA. I was a trade unionist. We saw all this coming, that this is bad for us. What are we talking about? Deindustrializing our country, sending all our jobs, our whole industrial base over to China and Mexico and all these foreign countries. And so what we don't have, like, I love Trump's idea of trying to, make America great again and bringing back the businesses and all that stuff. But the problem is we've shipped everything off already to China. I mean, if there was let's say there was a war that broke out between China and the United States, I'm pretty sure it'd be over within a week, because they would just stop shipping our shit to us, and Walmart and Home Depot and, and all this other places wouldn't have any goods to sell anybody. There'd be panic in the streets within a week. So we got to bring back our industrial base, or we don't have a chance. I mean, we're in deep, deep trouble here in the West. I applaud what Donald's doing to that point, but there's other worrying signs. Some of his appointees, are not seems to be more like Israel first and America first. And then we have Larry Ellison and Oracle Open AI. Remember making this thing about the $500 billion investment. Trump brought in Larry Ellison. He's talking about bringing in AI vaccines for cancer. I mean, what's going on here?
Yeah. Well, I didn't vote for Larry Ellison.
No.
Yeah, this is the problem. Again, we come back to this administrative managerial state. And, Trump's attacking parts of that, but Trump's a human and he's got blind spots.
Hmm.
His ag secretary who wants animals to be able to be cooped up, and some other appointee is like big in the seed oil business, and then this Larry Ellison crook, and there's Trump's good on some stuff, but we
Yeah.
have to keep pushing him, especially on the areas where there's some questionable things going on.
But well, at least there is the good MAGA base led by Tucker Carlson. So as long as there's that there, it's maybe keeping course corrected. But yeah, there's good signs, there's bad signs. But what the best thing about what's going on is that the truth is finally coming out. Here in Canada, we're like I said, we're in deep trouble because even if the truth is coming out, like you said, they'll try to discredit it and everything and fight against it. But so yeah, it's pretty tough here in Canada. So, but I don't know. Um, I don't know. We got to keep fighting. But what I was getting back to is that we have to put aside our political differences. So what and that was leading to the fact that so in the last election, I became a campaign manager for the People's Party of Canada, Maxime Bernier's breakaway group. And if you
Right.
would have told, their first election in 2018, I wasn't even hardly aware of them. But what if I was aware of them? It was from what the media was telling me. They were a bunch of far right Nazis who wanted to, and all this stuff. Until I joined the group and I started saying this is the only alternative we have because of the only true populist party here in Canada. And I met a whole bunch of other former left wingers like myself who were involved with the PPC, saying, "Yeah, the NDP left me a long time ago." They became the party of the managerial class. They did, and they of the laptop managerial class. They infiltrated the unions and turned the workers against, and then turned the unions against the workers.
Well, what's happened is you're seeing the same thing with unions that you're seeing in other areas. Is that the management of the unions, the running of them, has been professionalized, right? And I use
Yes,
air quotes here. So instead of the unions' management being drawn from the shop floors of the workplaces where their members work, they hired people straight out of university or from other areas where those people have already been managers. They're not, the management of unions is not workers anymore. The management of unions is professional administrators. And
exactly.
they have their own class interests, they have their own loyalties, and that's not to guys like me and you that work for a living. We
That's
saw
right.
this with COVID. We saw this with the Freedom Convoy. Every single union in Canada denounced the Freedom Convoy and said all of their members should get the COVID vaccine. They threw away their members' right to bodily sovereignty. They're
That's right.
frauds. Every union in Canada ought to be decertified, destroyed, and start over again with actual workers from the shop floor.
Absolutely.
I'm not a big union guy. I'm ambivalent about them. I'm not for, I'm not against. But I do see what's going on with them. And like if I was ever going to join a union, I would be asking, who's running the union? Professional managerial class fucking nerds or people we voted for from the shop floor? And if
Yeah.
it's the first group, I would want nothing to do with them.
That's right. They threw me under the bus, my union, because I worked for, like I said, I worked for the public health, the public school system here in Saskatoon, and they did not have our backs. They did not have our backs. They said this is the way it is, and that's the way it's got to be, because we've got to follow the health guidance. It's the most important thing, right? Absolutely insane. They threw us all under the bus.
Yeah, no, it's terrible. So under the bus, you've got these fines. It
Yeah.
sounds like they're not going to go away anytime soon.
Nope.
You've got a give, send, go set up for people to try and help you out.
Absolutely. It's
Have you sought any other like financial advice or talked to any lawyers or accountants about like what you can do to like get out of this somehow?
I've my JCCF people basically did their best. They couldn't overturn the fines. Um, um, I've asked what I should do. So I'm getting some advice, but I need to really talk. I need somebody who will volunteer their time to help me deal with this in an appropriate way because I'm really over my head. So all I'm doing right now is they're going to be they're going to be going after me financially. So what I have to do is I set up this Give Send Go. You go to Give Send Go /RB Ham, and you see my story there. And so yeah, that's all I can do right now because they're like I said, they're not giving they're clawing back my income tax returns. They'll be garnishing my wages. I think they're going to try. I don't know if that's going to work. That hasn't happened yet. I'm still getting paid. But as far as I've talked to Andre, who was my lawyer for the JCCF, and he was going to try to talk to Joseph Bourgault of the Canadian Truth Matters. But I haven't heard back from them. I really don't know what to do. I mean, I guess one person said, "Well, why don't you just declare bankruptcy?" But I don't want to do that. I don't want to have to declare bankruptcy to get
No,
out of
that's
this.
that's that's caving to them. That's letting
Yeah,
them win.
yeah. So I just hope my story gets out there and people help me out and I can get through this. I want to make this not just about myself because there's so many other people involved. Like I said, my friend Mark Friesen, the Grizzly Patriot, got all these tickets too, and he lost his business over this. And so many other people lost their businesses, and so many other people in Canada are affected by this. That it's not just about me, but if I can publicize my plight, I can talk about these other people. Like I said, the frontline nurses like Sarah Tajonian and Kristen Nagel, they had their careers destroyed for trying to do the right thing. People who were trying to do the right thing and speak up against something they knew they were wrong and have now been proven right about. That's the crazy thing. We're being proven right, that we were right all along for this because we were actually following the proper guidance in science. We were digging down. We were doing our own research, and we've exposed these people as liars and charlatans. And it's coming out in the States. Of course, Tony Fauci famously, they had Joe Biden had to give him a preemptive pardon and backdated to 2014 because if they went after him, they could get him on all kinds of stuff. RFK Jr.'s book, the real Anthony Fauci, is a real eye opener because guess what? RFK Jr. isn't getting sued for it. Everything in
Right.
that
Well,
book
it's
is
gonna be
true.
it's gonna be interesting. So,
Yes.
later this week, Senate confirmation hearings for Trump's appointees will be continuing, and Tulsi Gabbard and RFK Jr. are on the docket for later this week, and we're gonna see, the deep state and the
Yes.
and the senators who are actually against the American people will be showing themselves because they don't want RFK Jr. anywhere near his appointment. The deep state people don't want Tulsi Gabbard near it because she's not entirely a pacifist and she's not entirely anti-war. She's still a little bit of a hawk with terrorism, but she is much, much less inclined towards all the warmongering that normally goes on in certain quarters of the American government, and those people are going to be pushing back against her. So it's going to be an interesting week in the United
Yeah.
States Senate.
Pierre Trudeau, Justin's father, famously said that when you live next to the United States, it's like sleeping next to an elephant and you're a mouse, right? So whatever happens there affects what happens here. So if there is a real revolution in this and there's a real coming to terms with this and people actually do start being held accountable for the harms caused by these lockdowns and restrictions and mandates and the damage that was done, and there is some accountability, any kind of accountability coming out about this, I think Canada will then adopt it because you can't help it. But through osmosis, it will eventually get into the Canadian consciousness. Right now, they did a poll, and 2 out of 3 Canadians said that they approved of how Canada handled the pandemic because we're still so brutally propagandized by our mainstream media here in Canada. People don't realize that not only the state media, the CBC, is funded by our government, but Global News is supposed to be independent. It gets funding from the government and and CTV gets funding from the government, and the government it gets fund is funding these media compacts with money they get from the World Health Organization, from the UN Media Compact thing, and by osmosis, all the reporters and everyone who reports them, these stenographers for the government, they're not actual reporters, they're not journalists, they're stenographers for the government. So order comes out from the government, this is how you're going to do, and the media just follows along and repeats the line. When they first brought in the COVID when the pandemic response, like within days from the government saying, okay, this is what we're going to do, the CBC, CTV, Global News would just repeat these mandates, restrictions, where this is what we're going to do. No gatherings of five or more or whatever, over and over again, just pounding it into people's consciousness. But what is good news is 1 out of 3 people say we did it wrong, right? The ones who are awake and aware, and it's getting better all the time. Over time, more people are waking up, more people are realizing they have vax injured friends, more people are realizing that how the families were destroyed and torn apart. Like that was the biggest one too. I mean, that was a big one.
Yeah, well, I mean, that's why I'm going to hold a grudge about this because I have cousins and various family back home in Canada that just stopped communicating during COVID and then probably saw me online defending the Freedom Convoy and then decided I was just a bad person, not worth talking to anymore. That's a wound. That's a wound that I'm not sure is ever going to heal. As far as the osmosis of accountability, I'm somewhat skeptical of that. Pierre Poilievre inspires no confidence in me.
No,
I like the PPC guys, but it seems politically like I just don't
untenable.
untenable for them to get elected. I'd like to see it, but like I don't know. And the liberals know this too. I mean, why are they trying to airdrop this Mark Carney guy in? Carney's singing from the same songbook. He advised Trudeau to put in the Emergencies Act. He wrote an op-ed about that in the Globe and Mail in February 2022. Get rid of the Freedom Convoy. Like Mark Carney is just an older, more bankster version of Justin Trudeau. Like
Absolutely.
these guys are going to continue to try and insulate themselves from any accountability or any course correction of what they're doing to ruin Canada.
Yeah,
So
they're doubling down, and plus we also have that's what they you can see what their tactic is now, because all of a sudden, instead of liberals talking about being a post national state, now that's we're Canada first. We're gonna run against Trump. That's their strategy. Is they're going to bring in Mark Carney, and then in March they're going to bring back Parliament, and they'll start the election cycle right there. And all the liberals will be talking about, the NDP will be talking about, is we got to fight Trump. Trump's trying to kill us. And so instead of negotiating and getting along and maybe trying to make our country better, we're gonna burn this country to the ground, trying to fight against the Trump team, and they'll corner. And Pierre Poilievre has already said that he will not exit the Paris Climate Accords. Pierre Poilievre has said he will not exit the World Health Organization. All these popular things that Trump is doing, which is what we want to see here in Canada, Pierre Poilievre is not going to do them. So what's going to change? All these axe the tax already. Chrystia Freeland and Carney have said, well, maybe we'll revisit this tax idea.
yeah,
And
my solution to this, and I mean it sounds ridiculous, but um, I would like for the Americans to do what they seem to do best, which is invade places and blow things up. So, I don't want America to become a 51st state. There's been lots of talk about this since Trump started trolling Trudeau a few weeks ago.
yeah,
Canada is its own place. It's got its own history and its own people and its own way of doing things. However, its current way of doing things is negatively impacting everybody it needs to change. The Canadian ruling class seems genuinely uninterested in any course correction. So, hey, let's have a regime change. Get the United States Marine Corps and the United States Army and the United States Air Force, come to Canada, liquidate our entire ruling class to a person, put on a big show of it, and then when you're done, hand the governance of Canada over to adults that understand that course correction is required. So, I would like to see a regime change operation in Canada. Not an invasion, not taking over, not 51st state. Come in, do what you gotta do, hand it back over to adults.
That sounds pretty good. I guess we should wrap it up because I see that your daughter's wanting to get your attention there.
Yeah, no, I got to go back and be a dad, and
Yeah.
um,
We've talked a lot about a lot of things. We could probably touch on a few more, but we kind of understand what's going on, what needs to be changed, and let's hope it happens. And once again, I'm RB Ham, Richard Brent Winteringham. RB Ham Beyond the Pale is my podcast. Please go to my watch I've done 54 episodes, touching on all these themes. And if you can help me out, go to my Give Send Go /RB Ham. Give generously, or any little bit helps at this point. And I'm fighting I'm fighting against this tyranny here in Canada, and it's tough because there's not many of us, but we're doing our best. We have some great independent media up here, like Rebel News, who I don't agree with everything they stand behind because they are a pro-Israel outlet and no holds barred. But like I said, I will unite with anybody to do right, with nobody to do wrong. And Rebel News had our back during the Canadian Freedom Convoy. They were great. The Shadow Davis Show is an awesome show. Another independent journalist here in Canada doing great work. So the podcast Shadow Davis at night. Other podcasts you can follow is What's Up Canada with Wayne Peters. He does a show every weeknight on YouTube and Rumble. Wayne Peters of What's Up Canada, touching on all these themes and the plight we have here in Canada. So, and Odessa Orlowitz for Liberty Talk Canada out in BC. She's following this stuff great. She's the one who Christine Massey leaked the avian flu roundtable, the secret roundtable that they had with public health officials back in March of last year, talking about how they were going to bring in this avian flu testing and trying to whip up a bird flu panic here in Canada, which is now under full swing. So they're doubling down on the next pandemic already here in Canada. And yeah, so follow those people and try to help us out here in Canada because the mainstream media here still holds a lot more sway than they do down in the States. I noticed that CNN is laying off hundreds and hundreds of people because their ratings are in the toilet. MSNBC is dying. The mainstream media is dying, and we can see
not in
this
Canada,
happening.
not in Canada, because Justin Trudeau keeps giving them money.
Yeah, that's the problem.
That
So,
needs to end too. The persecution of people like yourself needs to end.
yeah,
The subsidization of these lying fucking pricks in the media needs to end. So many things need to end.
yeah.
But we got to keep fighting. And RB, thanks for joining the show.
Thank you, Gord.
Thanks for sticking up for your fellow Canadians, and keeping the sort of focus on what's going on back home.
Yeah,
I appreciate that greatly. And yeah, man, I'll hope to get to talk to you again soon.
yeah. We'll have to get together and do it again. Maybe you'll come on my show again sometime.
All right. Well, thanks so much, RB, and everybody else. Go check out the show notes. I'll have links to everything Mr. Ham here just mentioned. And way of the road.